The president says he fears an invasion by Russia any day now, even as Secretary of State Antony Blinken addresses the UN Security Council, calling this a moment of peril, hoping to still prevent a war.
So let me make this simple. The Russian government can announce today, with no qualification, equivocation, or deflection, that Russia will not invade Ukraine. State it clearly. State it plainly to the world, and then demonstrate it by sending your troops, your tanks, your planes back to their barracks and hangars, and sending your diplomats to the negotiating table. In the coming days, the world will remember that commitment, or the refusal to make it.
Senior national correspondent Terry Moran joining me now live from Ukraine. So, Terry, how's Ukraine reacting to these new developments?
Well, the tension gets ever higher here because it certainly feels like this is the end of the diplomatic route. What we saw in the Security Council was basically a stalemate. The United States wants a guarantee that Russia will not invade Ukraine, and Russia responds by saying that it wants a guarantee that Ukraine will never join NATO, that the United States and NATO will roll back to 1997 structure, and that's not going to happen either. So it sounds like the time for talking is over, although they did leave the door open. Let's try and, they said, find a way forward, is what diplomats always say. But the way the Ukrainians are responding is that they sense it's real now. They sense this shift in seriousness. Look, they've been watching these troops mass on their border for months. They've been suffering cyber attacks. But they had dismissed that for a long time as just a little bit more of the same. 8 years now, they've been dealing with Russian-armed, Russian-backed separatists in the eastern part of this country. They've been at war with Russia, cyber attacks, the whole deal. What they believe now, though, clearly, is that the hour of decision for the Kremlin has come, and they're in the crosshairs. So while I've been here the past 2 weeks, Ukrainians, it seems to me, just in this very brief period, have gone from skepticism that anything that bad could happen to disbelief that it could, to now growing fear that it will.
So Ukraine has also blamed Russia-backed separatist forces for shelling a village controlled by Ukrainian troops. You reported on this morning. It hit a kindergarten there. We saw the pictures. What more can you tell us, Terry?
Well, Kira, these are checkable facts. What you have right now are dueling claims. Russia was out first, the Russian-backed separatists, their proxies, saying, oh, they shelled one of our kindergartens. Well, when reporters and international monitors actually went to find it, it was on the other side, on the Ukrainian side of that line of conflict. And it is clearly shelling from the other side. So this is just part of the confusion that the Kremlin and its allies here are trying to sow, and just the general disinformation, ginning up the tension, but also looking for a pretext. If the Ukrainians are shelling kindergartners, it's easy to see, especially since those are Russian-speaking, Russian-sympathizing, many of the people on that side, although not all, people who live there. And Vladimir Putin could say, we have to come to their rescue. It's time for war. And at the end of the day, it is pretty clear that the facts on the ground is that that kindergarten, and no one was killed, there were a couple of soldiers injured, is on the Ukrainian side. And that's what it's come to, that kind of disinformation, that kind of deceit.
So Blinken also said there at the UN Security Council that he had sent this letter, Terry, to Russia's foreign minister proposing that they meet next week. So what are the next steps on the diplomatic front? And this clearly contradicts what we heard from the president today, who says he feels there could be an invasion within days.
That is very ominous from President Biden. He's reading not just the intelligence, but the situation. Biden is, experienced. He was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He was vice president of the United States. He's been around the block on several geopolitical crises, and he's looking at this and seeing where it's headed. What could be the next steps in diplomacy? Well, there is possibility that perhaps the United States, Russia, and Ukraine could sit down at a table, and the three of them could say, this problem in the east of this country, maybe there's a way we can talk our way out of it. The problem is that Russia is making an absolutist demand. They don't just want that. They want Ukraine to pledge never to join NATO. They want NATO to roll back all the way quarter century. And the United States is saying that they want a pledge from Russia not to invade. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are saying we don't even want to talk to Russia unless they are willing to talk about getting out of our country. And that is where the diplomatic stalemate is. It's hard to see that it could be advanced. To clarify, they're willing to talk to Russia about getting their Russian-backed separatists disarmed. They aren't willing to talk to Russia about giving up NATO, is what I meant.
All right. Meanwhile, Terry, you're going to continue this conversation with Russia, formally responding to the United States in the discussion over Moscow's demands, saying that the U.S. has not given a constructive reply to Russia's demands and that Moscow might resort to military technical measures. I will let you take the conversation from here.
All right, with that, those military technical measures, what a piece of verbiage that is, Kira. Military technical measures. Let's bring in our ABC News security contributor and Colonel Stephen Ganyard, who's been with us so often on these issues, and Christopher Schroeder, who is the CEO of Gray Market Labs, to get on the cybersecurity part of this. Steve, let me begin with you. This sense that it feels to me, and I'll trust your judgment on this, that it is the 11th hour for diplomacy. And we are at the precipice, given what we heard in the Security Council and given the posture of Russian forces. How do you read the situation where we are right now?
Yeah, Terry, I guess I'm in the minority these days, but I'm still 51% convinced that he will not invade, that this is a bluff. But the thing that's most concerning is that we don't see an off-ramp here. Normally, there would be a way for whoever was escalating the situation to say, we'll go off over here, and this will allow us to diffuse the situation. So I think that that's what's most concerning here. We know that the Russians are doing everything from disinformation, moving military troops and assets into place to where they think that the U.S. thinks that they would be able to successfully invade Ukraine. So very concerning in the sense that it's hard to see how Mr. Putin gets out of this while saving some face.
It does seem like he's almost boxed himself into a corner, maybe a place he wanted to be. Chris, let me ask you, the cyber battlefield has been really raging here in Ukraine for many years. Russia has demonstrated the capacity to penetrate some critical infrastructure systems of the Ukrainians and do what they want in them. There is a sense the United States government and others believe that the attack, if it comes, will begin with some kind of cyber attack. What would that look like? And if I can ask you a personal question, what would that look like for somebody here in Ukraine with some devices? Would I be able to sense what's going on if the attack starts rolling out? Can you answer that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's going to take multiple factors, and that's the problem, right? Russia can take they have the resources to take many different avenues to attack Ukraine from a cyber perspective. And we saw the denial of service attack yesterday, and that is very public, and we're not going to see a lot of the attacks that are happening. And people tend to focus on the infrastructure, focus on the big systems and the big organizations, but really they can be starting to go after small internet providers and take out your internet access in localities, and you don't have to take it out into the entire country to have a huge impact. So when you're asking about what's going to happen to you personally, well, depending on where Russia starts to come in and where they have the advantage, they will start some tactical cyber attacks in those areas to give them the best advantage in those areas. As much as they can sow that disinformation or start to disrupt what's going on, that's what they're going to do to give them the most advantage as they're doing the invasion.
That's very helpful. I wasn't just asking for me, but for the ordinary person, would they be able to feel it in the cyberspace? Let me go back to Steve on this question of the off-ramp and diplomacy, and more important, how all of this fits into the information battlefield. We talked about the cyber battlefield, but now it does sound and feel as if both sides are waging a war of words almost literally now, trying to gain advantage in this geopolitical power struggle over Ukraine. The president has been releasing intelligence information, and Secretary Blinken today talking about disinformation. How do you read the information battlefield and the way the American government under President Biden is fighting in it?
Yeah, Terry, one of the things that's quite interesting here is the role of social media in this conflict. And social media is a great purveyor of both information and disinformation. So it's been quite useful, sleuths, crowdsourcing, figuring out where the Russian military is going based on looking at some of their troops and their social media, taking pictures and then being able to track vehicles. But that's also a double-edged sword in that, to I think the point you're making here is that social media can be used in ways that would be helpful to Mr. Putin. The U.S. has called out Russia for weeks now, as have the NATO allies, to say, we know your playbook. We know what you're going to do. You're going to fabricate some incident, and then you're going to use it as a pretext. It's something that, you know, Mr. Putin was involved in something like this back in 1999, when 300 people were killed in Russia, and that was used as a pretext to invade Chechnya. So this is right in the playbook of the Russians. What's different here is that the role of social media and the power of social media has accelerated in those years to an unprecedented level, so that it's a force unto itself. And so the U.S., the UK, and other NATO allies are trying to get out ahead and to take Mr. Putin's ability to wage war in the information realm away from him before he can use it as a pretext.
It's fascinating. There are days when I think, you know, maybe 30% of all the people on Twitter are trolls working for somebody or just for kicks and don't trust what happens out there. But, Chris, let me go back to you. I don't know if Gray Market Labs, your company, does defense contracting, but if you were advising the defense forces of Ukraine with the coming cyber attacks, which will have a military component, I'm pretty sure, you know, how can they harden their defenses? What should they be looking for? How does it work for them in the cyberspace, those who will actually have to fight the battle if it comes?
Sure, and I actually worked with Ukraine back in the mid-2000s, I guess, 2015, 2011 through 2015 or so, and they're fairly well trained. It's a good military. They're very competent. They're very good at what they do. It's the scale of what they have, and I think that's where we need to, our coalition, the U.S. and European allies, need to really come to bear here. We can defend the military systems. They train at that all the time. They know how to protect the military systems. But the attack isn't just going to come at the military. It's going to come against civilian assets as well. So you need to bring together both the military assets and the civilian assets to really see, okay, well, where's the attack coming from? How can we defend it? How can we keep our nation running while an invasion might happen or might be about to happen? That's going to be the hardest part. And once the conflict starts, can we see the indicators and warnings of where the Russian forces are going to move next from a cyber perspective? I mentioned social media as an indicator, right? It's a great source of information because people are the ones that are really going to tell us what's happening, more so than what we're going to ever hear from Russia directly. So that's what we need to be monitoring. They need to be monitoring those sources to really see what's going to happen, to try to get as much advantage, much response time as they can, to give them some sort of advantage in an overmatched situation.
It's a great point that I talk about the information battlefield, cyber battlefield. It's really a whole of society battlefield with people pitching in on social media and other places. Steve, I want to finally come back to you and that 51% of you, as you began our discussion with, saying that that sense that maybe there's still a way to climb down from this precipice and get out of this with people still safe. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said today that the U.S. government believes that Russia is now stocking blood supplies along the border, and field hospitals have been seen to be set up close to the border. If this is a bluff, it sounds like a heck of a bluff, Steve. How do you read those?
Yeah, they're pulling out all the stops, Terry. I mean, and part of that is like, well, how do we know? Are we being fed disinformation at the intelligence level, at the IC level? So, yeah, we can look at overhead imagery, and we do have some good human insights on the ground. But again, I think that you know, when I still don't believe that it's anything but a bluff. Let's go back to the numbers. 150,000. That sounds like a lot of troops. That sounds like a lot of firepower. It is, but Ukraine is the size of Texas, and it has 42 million people, so another 10 million people more. Their ground forces match that 150,000. They have another 75,000 in their military, and they have 900,000 reservists in addition to sort of local militia groups that are there to defend. This is not going to be easy. It's wintertime. As you know, it's raining. It's above freezing every day. That makes mud, and tanks hate mud. So this idea that the Russians are just going to walk in and conquer Ukraine, I think is nonsense. If they have only parity And go back to there's a rough rule of thumb, and that is in military actions, you need to have a 3-to-1 advantage of attacker to defender. The Russians aren't even at parity. So yes, they have a much better military. They have a much better trained force. But again, if you're at parity and you think you're going to walk in and conquer a massive city like Kiev when the weather's bad and you don't have close air support, you don't have your attack helicopters, and all the bridges are going to be blown and all the roads are going to be blown and there's mud, this is something that Mr. Putin knows because he lost in Chechnya under these same conditions, but he lost to a bunch of rebels. And remember, Terry, that if he loses, it's his regime that comes down as well.
That is one of the things in the cards, I suppose, that it's easy to start a war. It's hard to say where it goes, as the United States has learned painfully over the past 20 years. Steve Ganyard and Christopher Schroeder, thanks very much for that.
Thanks, Terry.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.